Welcome to the 1-2 Tempo Us podcast. I'm your host, Dave Tainer. So, first off, what a week. Alliance Nationals, Indiana Magic Gold, 2030, Rogers Fritsche finished runner-up nationally. Last year was third, this year second. I like the trajectory. But 16 games, 7 days, no time limits, 3 double elimination brackets, with 10 players the majority of the time, 2 pitchers. By the last day, there wasn't much left in the tank. I just spent the week watching a group of 14-year-old girls do something that's becoming harder and harder to find. They chose the team over themselves. There were 2 moments that I've been replaying in my mind ever since we drove home last night. The first was my daughter, Chloe. By the championship series, she had already thrown more pitches than she'd ever thrown in a tournament. Normally, 300 or 400 pitches in a tournament is a heavy workload. This week, she pushed past 800 pitches. There wasn't another option. The team needed her to perform. So she kept competing. Not because she felt great or was fresh enough to really do it, but because sometimes leadership isn't about feeling ready. It's about answering when your teammates need you. There's a quote I've used before that kept running through my head really all week. When preparation meets the unknown, discipline becomes the deciding factor. You don't rise to the level of your dreams, you operate at the level of your preparation. The unknown beyond your comfort zone doesn't care what you hope for, it tests what you prepared for. Even earlier in the week, I made a post on social media as well that simply said, results take care of themselves when you invest in the daily discipline. Watching Chloe this week, I couldn't help but think, these are the moments that she grinds for every single day. The strength and conditioning sessions, the bullpen sessions, the hitting lessons, the tee work, the recovery work, the nutrition. Every ordinary day preparing for the extraordinary one. By the end of the week, she was named to the Alliance Nationals All-Tournament team, earned player of the game in the Super Regionals final to send her team to the Elite Eight, and did whatever her team needed her to do in order to compete. Now, those words are special. I appreciate the honors that she got. But what I'm most proudest of, that when the team needed her to carry a heavier load, she simply answered the call. The second moment wasn't about pitching at all. It was about one of her teammates. And in my admittedly biased opinion, the best damn third baseman in the country. She's also been consistently one of the better hitters in the country. But this week, she struggled a little bit early in the tournament at the plate. So the coaches made the difficult decision to leave her out of the starting lineup for a game. Now that's a moment that at times could divide a team. But the reality is it revealed one. She could have sulked. She could have checked out. She could have made it about herself. Instead, she stayed ready. And later in the game, she came off the bench. She scored the go-ahead run in international tiebreaker by stealing third and then taking home on an overthrow. And then in the extra innings on the defensive side of the ball, made one of the biggest plays, defensive plays in the tournament. Back-picking a runner on an excellent bunt that was laid down, back-picking her at third in order to preserve the win. Different stories, but the same lesson. One player persevered through exhaustion. The other responded to disappointment with preparation. Neither one of them was thinking about themselves. They were thinking about the team. And truthfully, it wasn't just those 2. It was all of the girls. Every one of them sacrificed something during the week. Some sacrificed innings. Some sacrificed at bats. Some sacrificed their normal position. Some sacrificed recognition. But every one of them invested in each other. And somewhere during that week, loyalty became stronger than fatigue. That's hard to build and even harder to sustain. So as I watched the girls this week, I realized I wasn't just watching softball. I was watching the difference between compliance, commitment, and being compelled. And it reminded me of a coach who I've got a special relationship with over the years, who first taught me this concept over a decade ago, Coach Bill Nickell. By the time this podcast is published, I'll be a few days into my 32nd football camp. 32. that number has me thinking a little bit. Maybe I'm getting a little nostalgic, or maybe it's just a midlife crisis. Actually, it's probably the midlife crisis. I recently bought a new truck, found myself in the squat rack again 2 times a week, started a new podcast. Yeah, I think that checks all of the boxes for a midlife crisis. So maybe it isn't nostalgia after all. But football has a funny way of making you remember people. Every camp seems to remind me of people, places, and events throughout my career. Urbana University, Bad Company, the Band of Brothers, the fields, the long bus rides, weight rooms, long nights watching film to the wee hours in the morning. But a lot of this, and almost all of it, connects back in some way to one person. The man that I've coached more football with than anyone else. Our head football coach at Defiance College, Bill Nickell. This season, we'll step onto the field together for our 133rd game that we've shared. 33 of those games, he played for me. The other 100, we've coached together. That's a long time. Long enough to watch somebody grow, long enough to trust them implicitly, long enough, if I'm paying attention really, to realize they started teaching me every bit as much as I've taught them as well. This podcast isn't going to be about Bill becoming a head coach. Truthfully, I knew that was going to happen well before he believed it himself. He used to always say, I think I want to be a head coach. I knew it was going to happen. And the podcast isn't really about the 6 stages of accountability either. Although that presentation, when he did it, was the moment I knew he would become a head football coach, and a really good one. This episode is really about one of the greatest privileges leadership gives you. Watching someone you once led become someone you're willing to follow, or maybe even compelled to follow. When I first met Bill Nickell, I almost missed him. Actually, I was pretty quick to dismiss him. I had just accepted the head coaching job at Urbana University in 2008. Accepted the job on the phone, jumped in my truck, drove straight to campus. The next morning, I was in individual meetings with every player. Those meetings, to say the least, were entertaining. If you remember the earlier podcast, you realize in 2008, we went 1-10. But every kid that walked into my office thought he was one great offseason, one little bit of film away from being in the NFL. Then Bill walked in. He was one of the few players that I actually had to look up at. Tall, respectful, humble, and pretty skinny. He did possess a healthy level of confidence, like a man that was living with a purpose. But there wasn't a whole lot of but to go along with that confidence. He was probably only about 210 pounds, and he wanted to play center. Now, if you know me and have listened to my podcast before or heard me talk about offensive line, you already probably realize I have a pretty unreasonable expectation when it comes to my centers. I've been one. And I was a pretty good center. I played the game at around 320 to 330 pounds. I've coached offensive lines for most of my career. When I picture a center, I picture somebody built to move the earth. Strong, physical, quick, and violent. There was absolutely no chance in my mind that a 6'3", 210-pound kid could become that guy. So I basically told him, you're not big enough. Fortunately, though, Bill wasn't as interested, in my opinion, as I was. So looking back, I wasn't wrong about what I valued in a center. Physicality matters. Strength matters. Toughness matters. What I underestimated was the amount of relentless work he was willing to put in. I underestimated what happens when character refuses to negotiate. Over the next 2 years, Bill built himself into exactly what we needed in the position. Not because he talked about it, not because he talked about leadership or talked about it, he lived it. He became the leader of Bad Company, our offensive line. He earned trust. One workout, one practice, one teammate at a time. And in 2010, just 2 years after he started that journey, Bill was the center on the first conference championship team in Urbana University history. Now fast forward a few years to 2013. Bill's now coaching with me for 2 full seasons and is heading into his 3rd season. Prior to the onset of every season, as a coaching staff, for about 2 weeks before the student athletes arrived, we'd get together and we had our preseason coaches meetings. As part of those meetings, we did an exercise called COD, C-O-D, stood for Coach of the Day. Now, the goal of this meeting is the coach who took it in the afternoon, you were the head coach of the meeting, right? One coach owned that meeting. In that meeting, you didn't just teach football, you were the head coach. The goal wasn't to survive your presentation. The goal was to create a productive environment where everyone could grow as a coach. Now, each assistant was at a different point in their career, so the meetings varied widely, but it created part of the experience. The COD gave each of us, access to the collective wisdom of the entire staff. On this specific day, Bill chose to talk about accountability, not punishment or not discipline, accountability. And somewhere during that presentation, I quit listening as the head coach and evaluating an assistant to where I started listening as a student. That was a little bit of a strange feeling because I think in these meetings, every head coach likes to think of themselves as the one that's doing the teaching, to doing the acclimation to our culture. But every once in a while, if you're fortunate and you have a great assistant on your staff, you realize you're the one being taught. Bill's presentation eventually became part of every program I've led since that year in 2013. Not because the presentation had great graphics. At the time, I thought they were outstanding. But looking back, those graphics have aged just about as well as VHS recruiting highlights. They could probably use a little updating. But the ideas, those never left. They've stayed. Because Coach Nickell wasn't just teaching accountability. He was answering 3 questions every organization eventually has to answer. 1, how do leaders earn trust? 2, how do leaders produce results? And 3, how do you move people from simply showing up to becoming completely invested? But before we get into the 6 stages of accountability, I think there are 2 ideas we have to more deeply understand first. Because Bill didn't earn the right to teach that day by making a good presentation. He earned it over 6 years, 3 as a player, 3 as a coach. He earned trust, and he consistently delivered results. Those 2 things, trust and results. I repeat, those 2 things, trust and results, are the foundation everything else sits on. But neither happens by accident. Trust has to be earned, results have to be led, and both require balance. Within our programs, when we have taught alignment of leadership for trust, we talk about the 3 C's, the 3 C's of trust: character, connection, and competency. Character demands that you're a man of integrity. You protect the standard. You challenge directly. Connection means building real relationships. Real relationships deliver real results. You do that by being authentic and caring deeply. Competency means being able to do the job. People have to believe that you can do the job and that you can prepare them, develop them, and help them succeed. When character and connection achieve a level of balance and your competency grows as a leader, the trust ceiling grows higher and higher. And once people trust you, they become willing to follow. But following isn't the finish line. Leadership still has to produce something. Aligning leadership in order to produce results also depends on balance. Balance between accountability, clarity, and support. Accountability protects the standard. Clarity teaches the what and the why. Support gives people what they need to meet the expectation. Too much accountability without support becomes punishment. Too much support without accountability lowers the standard. And without clarity, people may work hard, but in completely different directions. When accountability, clarity, and support stay aligned, results grow. Trust gives you the permission to lead. Alignment gives you that leadership direction. But Coach Nickell's presentation went deeper because even with trust, even with clear expectations, even with support, people still respond to leadership at different levels. Some resist it, some tolerate it, some do exactly what is asked, some take ownership, and a select few begin pulling everyone else forward. That is where Coach Nickell took us next in that meeting more than a decade ago, the 6 stages of accountability. Coach Nickell presented the stages of accountability like a staircase. Resistance, then reluctance, then compliance, then complacency, commitment, and the top stair was compelled. At first glance, it looks like a simple climb, but it isn't, because hidden in the middle of that staircase is a broken step. Now, the first step, at the bottom, it's resistant. The resistant person does not trust the leadership. They do not trust the culture. They may be physically present, but philosophically, they're somewhere else. They believe in a separate way of doing things. Their goals are disconnected from the goals of the team or unit. They aren't bought in, and often they don't want to be. You cannot coach resistance the same way you coach commitment. Before you can move someone forward, you have to understand why they are pushing back. The next step is reluctance or reluctant. The reluctant person isn't fully resistant anymore. They can begin to see the importance of leadership. They may even recognize the value of culture, but they still aren't ready to fully engage. They're watching, they're testing, they're waiting to see if the leadership is real, if the culture is real, waiting to see whether the standard applies to everyone, waiting to see whether your actions as a leader match your words. Reluctance is progress, but it isn't buying in, not yet. The next stage is compliant, and where the buy-in begins. The compliant person trusts the culture. They trust the leadership enough to do what is asked of them, and they'll usually do it well, but they won't do more. They meet the expectation, they complete the assignment, they follow the plan, but the motivation is still external. It hasn't been internalized into their being yet. Someone has to ask them, someone has to remind them, someone has to lead the way. Compliance can look like success from the outside. And truthfully, a lot of organizations that are highly successful have a lot of compliant people within them. But that's where the organizations and teams sometimes celebrate too early, because compliance is better than resistance, but compliance is not commitment. The next stage, though, is the trick step. It's the broken step. It's the complacent step. It's complacency. The complacent person becomes satisfied with their progress. They're satisfied with being compliant. They feel like they've done enough to be successful, enough to feel secure, enough to stop being hungry. The growth mindset begins to disappear. Skills stop developing, and preparation is losing its edge. The person may still look compliant. They may still show up. They may still complete their work, but inside they've stopped climbing. And complacency is dangerous because it rarely feels like failure, but it really is. It feels comfortable. It feels earned. It feels like you've arrived, but nobody stays on that broken step forever. Eventually, you either climb toward commitment or you begin sliding backward toward reluctance, and sometimes all the way back to resistance. That fall, just like would be on a broken step, can happen fast. That's why complacency isn't simply another stage. It's a trap between doing what you're told and becoming fully invested. If you can move beyond complacency and the step needs to happen and move forward, you've arrived at committed. The committed person is a good leader. They're committed to growth. They take ownership of their development. They're willing to give all of themselves to the team. They don't need to be constantly reminded. They don't simply meet the standard when someone is watching. They meet it all the time. They begin to carry the standard themselves. They're dependable, consistent, trusted. People believe in them because their actions have earned their belief. And that's what a good leader is. Commitment is powerful. But Coach Nickell's model didn't stop there, because being committed to your own growth still isn't the highest level of leadership and the highest level of accountability. That final stage is compelled. The compelled person isn't only committed to growing themselves, they feel a responsibility to help others grow. They invest in their teammates, they strengthen the culture, they develop leadership around them. They don't simply protect the standard, they inspire others to believe in it. The committed leader gives everything they have to the team. The compelled leader helps everyone around them discover that they have more to give. That's the difference. Committed says, I'll do whatever it takes. Compelled says, I will help us become more than we ever believed we could be. And sitting in that meeting, listening to Coach Nickell teach those 6 stages, I realized something. He wasn't just describing leadership. He was becoming the kind of leader he was describing. You know, sometimes people ask me what I'm most proud of in coaching after nearly 30 years of doing it. Championships matter. Records matter. Players matter. All of those things are part of the story. But if I'm honest, the thing I'm probably most proudest of is watching my former players become coaches and leaders. Watching people I once poured into become the people who pour back into others. Because somewhere along the line, you quit counting wins and you start counting people you've had an impact on. This season, Coach Nickell and I will walk onto the field together for the 133rd time. 33 of those games he played for me. The rest, we've coached shoulder to shoulder. I don't know how many more games we'll get. Coaching has a way of reminding you not to take any of those things for granted. But I do know this. The greatest compliment a leader can ever receive isn't that people remember what you taught them. It's the one day they teach you something that you'll carry for the rest of your life. Want to? Tempo us.